I think we will make a start. We are likely to have other people joining us as we go forward. I'm just going to do some housekeeping and then I'll introduce you to our chair, Dr. Lisa Cameron MP. So I'm Jacqueline Winstanley, I'm founder and CEO of Universal Inclusion, and we're providing the secretariat for the group, supported by Pink Shoe. And Helen Martin G, the founder, has joined us today. So just a little housekeeping. So please remember that this is a recorded session. We're not going to put out the full session, but we will summarise it, and we will be making a podcast from the panel that we will run today. Could we ask you to please stay muted throughout the session unless you're invited by the chair to speak? But please do use the chat function, tell us who you are, share your hashtag, and we will throughout the session we'll be tweeting and all of that sort of social media that I don't understand. Any questions that we don't respond to today will be collated and will be responded to. If you do require a BSL interpreter, please pin the BSL speaker to your view. Okay, I'd like now to introduce you to Dr. Lisa Cameron. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the housekeeping rules, which are always extremely important. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to introduce myself, Dr. Lisa Cameron. I'm the MP for East Kilbride, Straven and Lesmahagow. I'm absolutely delighted to be chairing the new entrepreneurship group, which has been set up particularly round about themes of inclusion. So it's APPG, for those who are interested in tweeting, and we can keep you right with that. And it's all about inclusive entrepreneurship, where we're going to be trying to support those with protected characteristics into business, and making sure that we highlight the challenges, the additional challenges that many people have to overcome, but also look at ways of providing progressive policy initiatives to support people into business and overcome many of those challenges. So today we're starting off with a really exciting agenda, which is going to be focusing on media and creative spaces. And there are many entrepreneurs within this particular sector, and it will be really interesting, and I think it will be really quite exciting to hear about some of the work that is already being done and some of the initiatives we can take forward and support in terms of making media and creative spaces much more inviting for the inclusive entrepreneur moving forward. So today's programme, aside from my sort of short welcome at the start, we'll be speaking a bit about the concept of inclusive entrepreneurship, why it's really important that this all-party group has been set up, and then we'll be having a showreel of inclusive entrepreneurs, and Jacqueline will be speaking about the purpose of the group and the programme of work. We're also going to be launching an inquiry report that we'll be able to speak a bit about, and then we'll move on to our panel discussion, which is all about opening up media and creative spaces. And we'll hear from Grant Logan, the founder and CEO of Ability Today, James Holt, singer-songwriter, and John Kiehl, who's the co-owner of Soundtrack Recording Studios in New York City and Boston. So thank you very much for attending today. I'm going to hand over to Jacqueline so that we can get on with our business, because we've only got an hour and we've got a lot, as I've explained, to get through. There will be time for people to ask questions, and anything that we don't get to today, we will follow up with you after the meeting. So please enjoy today's session. It's all about Parliament learning and developing progressive policy initiatives that support you moving forward. So don't be shy in letting us know your ideas throughout this meeting and the meetings that will follow. So I'll hand over now to Jacqueline. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And I should have said on the housekeeping as well, at one point we will take a photograph. So if anybody doesn't want to have the photograph taken, please just go off your camera and we'll respect your decision on that. And I think we'll do that possibly when we launch the inquiry. That would be a good place to do that photo further on in the session. So the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is, when we're talking about inclusive entrepreneurship, what do we actually mean? So for the purposes of our group, what we're talking about is enterprise that's created by people who have protected characteristics, and in this group, particularly disabled people. We're also including in that people that support that inclusive economic growth. We're talking about something that contributes to innovation and helps the economy, grows GDP. It supports the disability strategy and how we evidence the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a real and sustainable alternative to intergenerational poverty, and it improves mental health and well-being. What we thought would be really nice at this point, because we can talk about it, but what I wanted to share with you is a short film, very short film, that actually showcases some of our member inclusive entrepreneurs, which I think you'll find very interesting. As it stated at the end there, that music was very kindly provided to us by one of our speakers today, James Holt, and we use that at all of our sessions. So thank you so much, James. And I'm sure you'll agree what an incredible breadth of innovation this sector is creating. Thank you. So we're going to move on now to talk about the purpose of the group. So bear with me because we've got a lot of work to do. So we're looking at the removal of barriers, and we want to change the narrative. We want to increase the numbers and the profile of inclusive entrepreneurs. We're wanting to raise awareness of the current conditions that affect them, particularly those who have protected characteristics and the disabled entrepreneurs. We want to seek parliamentary support and/or scrutiny of the Secretary of State for the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and other appropriate departments in any consultations that take place on inclusive entrepreneurship related issues. We want to encourage oral and written questions to members of Parliament regarding inclusive entrepreneurship. We want to keep under review policies as well as funding and development programmes both here and in the UK that affect and the impact they have on entrepreneurs who have protected characteristics, again, particularly disabled entrepreneurs. We want to assess how disabled entrepreneurs might respond to changes in the business climate, including the current pandemic, and to seek action by Parliament and the government to support them during this time. We want to support the development of an inclusive entrepreneurship mentoring programme involving business leaders and startup entrepreneurs who have protected characteristics. So at this point, I think what's really important is how can you get involved? We'd like you to become a member. We'd like you to invest and contribute your expertise to meetings and the various initiatives organised by the Secretariat. We'd like you to consider sponsoring key elements of our work, such as the inquiries and research that we will take forward. Possibly consider sponsoring our secretariat, the opportunity to support our awards, meetings, events or initiatives which complement our work programme. Joining our Pay It Forward scheme, where should we get back to Westminster and some of our entrepreneurs may not be able to actually afford to come down to Westminster, to assist them to do so. To sponsor the hosting and building and maintaining of a dedicated website, and enhance our digital platform to support inclusive entrepreneurship in the UK. Thank you. So if we now look at our two-year programme of works, gosh, that suddenly hit home. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is producing a national evidence-based report, and we'll launch that later today. We want to coordinate written and oral parliamentary questions and debates that are gathered from our sector. This is about lived experience, and it's your views and your needs that we want to represent in Parliament. To organise events with parliamentarians and key members of the entrepreneurial community. To organise events with schools and universities and colleges, because this starts way earlier than we'd like it to. Ideally, we'd like to have this in the home corner, in the nurseries, that people have aspiration, that if they have protected characteristics, they can consider entrepreneurship. Arrange meetings between group members, government ministers and officials. To initiate and participate in parliamentary debates. To create an inclusive entrepreneurship accelerator programme. There are quite a lot of these around the country, some really successful ones, and we want one that actually shines out for people with protected characteristics. To upscale the Inclusive Entrepreneur Network, and to organise, and I think this is really exciting, a recognition programme culminating in an annual event in the House of Commons for our entrepreneurs and businesses that support us. And to link the work that's been done with the stock exchange, just to reinforce the impact this has on the economy. So we're launching our inquiry today. It's titled The Road to Wonder, because what we've seen so far is absolutely I suppose the real innovation, the absolute wonder of what everybody's doing. So our inquiry will commence September 2020 and we'll report back in June 2021. What are we going to look at? It's about considering the what, the who, the when, the where and the why. What is actually going on in our sector? What are we all creating? Who's actually sort of creating the innovation? When is this occurring? Where and why? We want to measure the contribution to the economy and the GDP. We want to measure the contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, the disability strategy, evidencing our compliance with legislation and guidelines for good practice. We want to look at the impact on health and well-being of our entrepreneurs. And a new concept that we're trying to bring into the inquiry is the impact beyond turnover, and I'll explain that. So often when our entrepreneurs are working and they are trying to access support, it's measured on their impact on their turnover. And what we're not collecting and recognising and celebrating is the incredible impact on what people might call the socioeconomic aspect of this. And you'll hear from one of our speakers later who gives a really good example of that. So we want to look at this in way beyond the turnover aspect of this and try to, in our recommendations, perhaps change things in that regard. And finally, we will report back and make recommendations on how to scale up this emerging sector. And I'm sure you'll agree, in the current situation that we find ourselves, with possibly entering in recession and the job losses that we're going to be seeing, this really reinforces that this is actually a sustainable, viable alternative for our entrepreneurs and people with protected characteristics generally. Okay, so this is quite an exciting part of the session. I would now like to welcome and this is new to me in terms of technology, so I'm hoping this does work. So please bear with us while we try to navigate this. We've invited to speak to you today three incredible entrepreneurs, and I'll let them tell their story because they do it far more eloquently than I can. We have had apologies from one of our speakers. We were expecting Julie Fernandez to join us this afternoon as well, but unfortunately Julie broke her arm and she's actually at the hospital having the plaster removed this afternoon. So we offer her our best wishes, and I'm sure we'll have opportunity to hear from Julie again. So if I could please ask John, James and Grant to unmute themselves, please. And the way we're going to run this, I'm going to ask them one question, ask them all to answer it, and continue. And I have 3 questions in total. Now, again, we've saved the Q&A right to the end of the session, in part because we do have a BSL interpreter, and we've had to give her a pretty good steer on what we're going to be saying, and it might be difficult to respond to individual questions. So we've saved all those to the end. I hope that's okay with everybody, but please do, any comments or questions, tweet them, put them in the chat, and we'd be delighted to hear them and come back to you at another time if you don't get an opportunity today. So my first question, and if I could please put that to John Kiehl. So the first question is, could you please outline your entrepreneurial journey? Thank you, John.
Sure. I'm assuming you can hear me. Nod your head if you can. My entrepreneurial journey, I think, started between my freshman and sophomore college year, where I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, took a bus to downtown St. Louis, worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield, doing calculations for them. Most days they didn't have any calculations for me to do, so I sat there doing nothing. But the days, at least when there was a calculation to be done in their statistics department, it was kind of fun because I was essentially a math major in college. But by the time I got home, it was 6, 7 o'clock at night. I had to go to dinner and then be in bed so I could get up at 6 o'clock. And I promised myself at the end of that summer, I would never work for someone ever, that life is too short. It's going to go flying by. And I noticed the first thing when you work for somebody else, they have to take the first 50 cents out of every dollar they're billing. And so I went into my college years not sure what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to work for myself. So I became or was an entrepreneur right from the start. And so out of college, I walked away from my engineering training and became a musician. And I think, as you're going to hear shortly from James Holt and probably Grant, that if you are a musician, you are an entrepreneur. As a matter of fact, it's so, the spirit and themes of being a musician are so ubiquitous and tied into the lifestyle. I don't even think as musicians we think about the fact that we're entrepreneurs. We've just integrated our personal lives, our goals, with the process of putting a roof over our heads. And it's a very difficult process, and it's something that every musician really struggles with. I got very lucky in that I met another gentleman, 6 years my senior, who had spent a few more years out of college. He actually was managing the bands I was playing in at the time. And he took me aside and he said, "John, I grew up in a musical family. I see that you want to be a musician. Let's go build our own business. Let's go build a recording studio. And that will give us a bit of a power base." And so he and I, after sort of working freelance, doing jingles, writing jingles for local food stores and bookstores, we opened a recording studio. And I can tell you, we didn't know the first thing about how you run a recording studio, how you be a recording engineer. But we were both smart guys, and we taught ourselves. And they were very long days and very thrilling days. And I would say it took us a good 2 years to get our feet on the ground. But here we are, we're now in our 42nd year of business. And we now have studios in Boston, Massachusetts, and we have studios in New York City. And our business has expanded from us being basically songwriters, writing jingles for local radio and television, to we came down to New York about, let's see, in 1985. So what's that, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, and got into the record making business. And then the movie industry came along in 1995 for us. We did our first sound. We mixed all the sound for a feature film called Welcome to the Dollhouse that won the Sundance Film Festival. The second year, we did 3 or 4 films for the Sundance Film Festival. One of those won the Sundance Film Festival again. The third year that we were in the business of making motion pictures, of the 18 films in competition at the Sundance Film Festival, my company did 13 of the audio tracks. And that's partly because we were in the right town. If you're in New York City, you can be in the independent film business. And I have all sorts, let me stop talking at this point, but one of my messages is how to be an entrepreneur. There's a smart way to go about it. And there's kind of a childish, what I call the Santa Claus way about it, of just believing that you say, I'm an entrepreneur and it falls, your life falls like dominoes. It doesn't. There's a way to go about it intelligently and notice the culture that surrounds being an entrepreneur. But I'll stop there, Jacqueline, and you can ask me any questions that you want to ask me. We don't hear you though, Jacqueline. At least I don't.
We're muted. I'm trying to avoid any background noise with me while you're speaking, but the muting and unmuting is going to go down in the dictionary, I think, through COVID. So if you could bring James in, please, if you could please share your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, so I'm James Holt, and I'm a deaf musician and solo artist based in Bolton in the UK, and I've always maintained that my love for music, and I guess in a way like my kind of entrepreneurial approach to music has stemmed from my disability, and I feel like they're both interconnected, not least because I have like an audio sensory disability, but also that my disability has shaped who I am today, and is probably the reason why I am a musician. And like I think it's taken me a while, like a few years to realize it, but I'm kind of very proud of that. And I think my aim is to inspire other young disabled musicians, because when I was growing up, I didn't have somebody who was like me, who was making music like I do, who was deaf or disabled for me to look up to. I mean, and I think much of my journey, I've had to like be very kind of pragmatic, and I have kind of like a do-it-yourself attitude towards my music making, and much of my music is kind of conceived and recorded in this room where I am now. And I've picked up lots of different skills like video editing and filming and designing artworks to become kind of as self-sufficient as possible. And I think kind of during lockdown, kind of this approach has been like very, very useful. And it's allowed me to kind of continue making music. I think, like I always say, kind of despite my disability, I've had to overcome boundaries, but I think I've also had like a lot of successes as well, just in my life and just in my career. And like I've been championed by Brian Eno and performed solo at the Royal Albert Hall. I've had lots of airplay on BBC and other national and international radio, as well as TV. And I've raised kind of thousands for charity through my music, which I think is kind of the thing I'm most proud of. And I've also like completed a master's degree in music composition. And yeah, that's probably about it for my like how I got into the music business.
Thank you very much, James. But I think a good example again of that your contribution to society really goes way beyond turnover, which is, I think that's a really good example of that. Grant, could I please ask you to unmute and share your journey with us, please?
Yeah, hi there. So my journey into disability started 17 years ago. I had a road accident which paralysed me from the chest down. I too was working in the music business, so that's all three speakers today working in music. I was managing some successful songwriters and artists, and it was a job that I loved. And I carried on doing it for a while afterwards, but to be honest, my passion was waning. And I was looking at other areas that I could make a difference in. And disability was becoming my passion. So I set up the first social network for wheelchair users back in about 2007 called The Wheel Life, which we did quite well for a couple of years before Facebook came along and killed off all the competition. But what it did for me on a personal level is it put me very much in the center of the disabled community. So I was invited to do some great adventures. So I've climbed Ben Nevis with Capability Scotland, and I've been rally driving, quad biking, flying, gliding, all of these different things. And I kept hearing on my return from these events, oh, I wish I'd known about that from other disabled people. And that sparked the idea for my next venture, which was at the time called Disability Today, which was really started by me with a computer pushing information out to the disabled community. Because one of the problems that the disabled community often has is providing information in a way that, you know, people that perhaps don't have the support networks in place find it difficult to find information out. So I started Disability Today in about 2015, and in 2017 we launched as a social enterprise. And I started bringing volunteers in to the organization, initially to support what we were doing, so to run Disability Today, to help find stories, to publish stories, to push news out. But then I realized that as I'm getting older and I'm not doing all of these mad, crazy adventures anymore, we should be sending our disabled team out to cover them. So some of our volunteers who have a wide range of abilities, we started sending them out on assignment to do roving reports on things like water skiing, indoor skydiving, flying, gliding, or even simple things like, you know, how does someone with electric mobility scooter or wheelchair get on a train or on a bus and head up to London? How do they get through the barriers? How do they pick up their tickets? How do the ramps, you know, operate on buses and trains, etc.? And we would create films, which we would edit down into kind of 3 to 5 minute videos of our roving reporters doing these great and wonderful different experiences, purely to really promote what is still available, what is still an option to people. There are some people that don't realize that the support is still out there. So we wanted to show people very much what you can still do. Hence renaming our organization to Ability Today last year, because we felt it was time to focus on what we can do and not what we can't. So our logo, we still have the DIS as part of disability, but we've put a red X through it to show that actually today it's about ability. And also last year I decided, or I asked myself, what was the next step? And the next step was to provide our roving reporters with a qualification. So I got in touch with the National Council for the Training of Journalists, and in partnership with them, this year we launched the first Academy for Disabled Journalists, which we are about 3/4 of our way through now, the first course. which has been a massive positive considering COVID came along. But yeah, we've managed to get the course up and running, and by the end of this year, we should have at least 5 or 6 qualified disabled journalists. So that's been a really positive move this year for us. Okay.
Great, thank you so much, Grant. Again, another incredible story, and that impact is just, it's sort of just like a ripple, isn't it? It's just such a wonderful thing, and it's impacting on so many other people, and particularly from the area that you're working in, the role models. And actually, I think I remember discussing with you very early on, it's about the disabled people reporting about what's important to the disabled people and being seen to be doing it, which is very, very important. Okay, and if we return now to our panel, and I'm going to proceed with the second question. I'm going to ask you all in turn again in the same order, so I'll come to John first. Could you share a little with us about the impact on COVID for your business?
That's an interesting question for me, because many of my colleagues were at their computers working on some feature film in the post-production stage, which is just you and a computer screen. So I actually have, we're working on a TV show right now that is at the very end of a pipeline that went entirely through COVID, and nobody missed a beat. Everybody just kept working. And now that we've reached some kind of sense of how people can start to come back together and be safe, we're working on, we're mixing this feature, the TV feature, but come October 1st, that project will come to its end, and none of those people have a next job. So one aspect of the COVID thing is some of us kept working and some of us didn't keep working. By and large, most of my staff did not keep working. So it had a tremendous impact. Fortunately, for a while, the United States federal government stepped up to the plate and augmented everybody's income a little bit. We've asked all our employees to take a bit of a pay cut so that we could maybe stretch this out. We all suffer a little bit, so to speak. But yes, the COVID, my understanding is what's happening out in Hollywood in the motion picture pipeline is that the insurance companies are not writing policies to insure the shoots, because no one knows what happens on the other side of someone claiming that they got COVID at a shoot, and who's going to be responsible for that, and who's, it's quite a litigious nation we live in over here. And so because these big shows can't get insurance packages to do the next, to fill up the pipeline, nothing is moving forward. So in a way, it's possible in my business, the worst is yet to come. Did I answer the question at all, Jacqueline?
You did, thank you. You did, thank you so much. James, could you follow on from that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think I went into it a little bit in my first answer, that like for me personally, I've been able to adapt quite well because I was already quite self-sufficient beforehand. But I mean, obviously I realize that, not everyone can do that. But I think for a lot of people working in the creative industry, the effect of lockdown has been kind of two-pronged. Obviously, it's had like a devastating economic impact, not only with artists, but like with the people who work behind the scenes. But I think it's also had like a detrimental effect on people's sense of purpose in a way, and I think they've had like their way of life kind of suddenly stripped from them. And I think like for me personally, what has been kind of like a lifesaver has been like a few commissions that I've received, and one of which I think we might hear later, and like that was a commission that I received last month from Manchester Histories and Drake Music as a response to the 50th anniversary of the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act, put forward by Lord Alf Morris. And it kind of relates to kind of where we're at the moment, because when I was writing that song, I was reading through all of the information that was sent over, and I read through the first reading of the bill on the Hansard archive, and Alf's words and the other MP's words actually inspired the song. And one of the main themes of the bill I found was kind of independence, and giving disabled people their independence and giving them a sense of purpose and something to live for and something to contribute. And I think like for a lot of artists, like musicians, people just who like might play in bands and wedding bands or whatever, I think they're suffering in a way of like I said, as well as financial. It's kind of it's having a mental effect as well, because they can't they can't kind of carry on their life, if you know what I mean. Like as a musician, kind of one of the main joys is to kind of play in front of people, and I think it's that could be something like one of my suggestions would be that organizations could do is give musicians and artists, creatives, kind of more of a sense of purpose, more of a sense of direction in providing like some sort of like the commissions that I had already done. Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
You did, thank you. And yes, we're very lucky today that James kindly allowed us, as we end our session today, not yet, so please don't switch off, we will be showing this incredible piece that James has produced in response to that commission. And yes, you do go into the next questions each time, James, but that's your enthusiasm and that's fine. So again, if I just want to make sure where I'm up to as well. So Grant, I think we're coming back to you at this point.
Yep, okay. So COVID has had a positive and a negative. The negative results have been that we lost our volunteers coming into the office every day. But also we lost the opportunities for them to go out and rove. So our assignments for to go roving reporters has also stopped, which has meant that, you know, they're all stuck at home trying to find stories to write about. But on a positive side, our academy, which we were launching originally, I think at the beginning of April, which was going to be based here in my office, and would have been limited to potentially students living within a 5, 10, 15-mile radius of the office. COVID actually gave us the opportunity to widen our scope by taking everything online. And we now have students in Scotland, Manchester, Norfolk, Luton, London, so all over the UK. So in that respect, it's actually been a very positive. And we'll have students coming to the end of this year, as I said earlier, that will, so we're hoping to have at least 5 students that will be qualified in a qualification in journalism by the end of this year, but there may be no places for them to go to. You know, originally I was speaking to different organizations, including the BBC, about work experience placements and, you know, work placements when they were qualified, which is going to become a lot harder when organizations like the BBC are obviously, you know, losing potentially a quarter of their staff anyway. So it's been sort of, you know, ups and downs for us, but we have managed to make some positives out of it as well.
Thank you so much, Grant. And then finally, to each of you, if I could ask you all to think just about one thing if you were to speak to government and ask them to do one thing to support the sector as we are emerging from the pandemic, and in general to become a successful inclusive entrepreneur, what would you say? So if I go to John, please.
So Jacqueline, I'm not sure I have a good answer for you, but maybe I can turn your question, I can morph your question a little bit that speaks to a bit of why someone without disability is here today. You know, I don't have a disability. My partner doesn't have a disability. But I am American. And as I got to know you and know Grant and know James, I can say, and I have said this, that America is way ahead of Great Britain on this topic. And if there's one thing I hope to bring to the party is getting clear on what our government has done that is waiting for your government to do. In the same way that when you meet a 6-year-old, you know that that 6-year-old is going to be a 14-year-old in a few years. I think we're just a little more mature on this topic. Part of that fits in with the myth that what makes Americans Americans is this belief in American individuality. And so the voices of people with disability has always been front and center. Our sidewalks had ramps years and years and years ago. When I bought a building and had to renovate, I had to put in an elevator just to go from the basement to the first floor. That was required by business ordinance. I'm sure these are all things that are being done in Great Britain and sort of scaling up. So let me just say that I'm hoping to be the guy that finds this sort of cultural success that's being enjoyed over here. And maybe you and I and Grant can figure out what we should be saying to Parliament of logical next steps.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. Okay, as modest as ever, John. For those that don't know, John has done a lot of work to support inclusive entrepreneurship in the UK, particularly within the creative space. And one of the events that we have in Liverpool, which showcases inclusive entrepreneurs, musicians, cultural aspects of things, and just gives people that where the space isn't there, we try to create it and give opportunities, and that's great that John supported everyone in that process. So thank you so much. And on to James, please.
Yeah, I kind of answered this question in my last question.
You did.
My last answer. So yeah, like just to kind of reiterate, it was more like if there's something that the government can do to like directly support creative people working in the creative industry, like providing financial support, but I think it will also help kind of motivate and encourage creativity and expression. And I thought it was interesting what John said actually, because like I mentioned that the Disability Commission that I did last week, it was part of like a wider festival in celebration of this act, and that was organised by Manchester Histories, and a lot of the talking points throughout the festival was the fact that you know, it's been 50 years on since this bill was introduced, but that's not been reflective of how the times have changed. It's not really I mean, it's like some of the speakers were saying in some cases it's kind of reverted back to what it was like before the bill was introduced. So I think it'd be kind of interesting to look at, you know, elsewhere in the world where the UK can improve on. And yeah, and I just wanted to just like maybe echo Grant's point as well, that like one positive outcome of the pandemic has been that, like, even though we've all become quite kind of isolated individually. There's been a lot of kind of outreach globally as well, and like I'm taking part in like a kind of a special online festival that's completely focused on accessibility, which is actually like it's an Australian-led festival called Isolate, and it features myself and 3 other disabled artists from across the world, and it's all focused on accessibility, and it features captions and interpreters. And I think that, just to end on like a positive note, that's one of the kind of positive aspects that would become maybe more globally connected.
Thank you, James. Thank you very much. Okay, and if we could come back to Grant, please.
Okay. Well, for me, I think, well, firstly, we need a much higher presence of disability in the media. You know, both in front and behind the camera. I have to say we're heading in the right direction. We've got some fantastic presenters now that have visible disabilities, but we're not training tomorrow's presenters or storytellers. And so I would ask for help in upscaling our academy and helping tomorrow's people that are going to be at the BBC, you know, with help me with access to grants, access to funding, investments, to really push on the development of, you know, students today that can be in front of the camera tomorrow. There's a lot of areas that we can work in, both in front of and behind the cameras. It's not all about presenting news at 10. We've got one of our students at the academy has a very high level of dependency, requires a 24/7 support worker, is pretty much non-verbal, but the guy has a maths degree. You know, he's super smart, super willing, super able, super motivated, but needs help and support. And one of the areas that we're supporting him in is actually helping him with doing data journalism, which is a massively growing sector of journalism. And so, you know, if we had some support from the government on that, we could really upscale what we're going to do.
That's great. Thank you so much, Grant. Okay. Well, I'd like to just thank all of our speakers today. That was a really informative and innovative, again, introduction to your journeys, and thank you for sharing some of your probably at times quite difficult experiences during COVID, and of course ending with the positives and the way forward. And I agree across the board in terms of learning from other countries, other organisations, etc., and the way they have been successful, building what we've already been developing here. Because what I want to emphasise in this as well is there is a heck of a lot of good work going on. And when we're looking at the inquiry, a lot of it is going to be collating what's out there. So there is some really incredible work going on within the sector. And again, coming back to James and Grant, I think really in terms of the request to upscale things and give opportunities, James has done really well from the commissioning that's taken place, and possibly there's something to be done in that respect. And the more people we have visible out there doing these kind of things, creating the role models, and the work program that we've put into place, I'm confident is going to do this and help things going forward. So thank you all once again. And what I'm now going to do is hand back over to our chair, and we're going to have our Q&A session. Now, I'm wondering really, we've had quite a few sessions on the chat, Lisa, so if I hand back to you, and if you perhaps, we can either have a look at some of those, and then if you've time, ask people to ask some questions as well.
Well, we can run 10 minutes over, I think that's fine. There's quite a lot on the chat, which I think a look at, which has been really helpful. So I've sort of written a list of it, so that there's a bit about access to adapted equipment and funding for that in relation to business startup, access to funding more generally, and the issue that I think we can probably write to government on and raise in Parliament, which is funding sitting currently within Department for Work and Pensions rather than in business, and as to the impact that that has, and actually the, you know, I think the message it gives as well in relation to people with disabilities, where all of the issues sit in DWP just now, but we've tried, there's movement to the Cabinet Office, and then there should be a movement right across all of the departments, so that these issues sit better in the sector that they should actually be placed. So I think that's one that we can take forward straight away, and specific funding streams for small businesses run by entrepreneurs that have disabilities. So I'm trying to think, if someone could put their hand up who wants to speak a bit to their question, to add a bit more meat around it, then we can go to you. If people don't want to.
Is that Lady Sharon? I think that's Lady Sharon Farley Mason's question.
All right. If you want to unmute yourself and just give us a bit more background to your question.
Hi, yeah, there was a couple of questions I asked actually, Lisa. I think I will stretch on the COVID one. Just let me find it again now here, because there's a lot gone on, hasn't there?
We're having a lot of chat, which is really, really good.
It is, it is.
It is, yeah.
Is that the one you're asking about the turnover requirements, Sharon, in terms of some of the support?
That was me.
There was one about
In a post-COVID world. Oh, that's Noreen. Post-COVID world question. What's the impact of COVID on criteria for support, for instance, by the access to work? Do they have a structure of criteria about this, or could the government look at that in any way to help us, you know, to give us some advice on that and to help us?
We've been doing quite a lot of work on access to work more generally in the All Party Group for Disability, because it seems to be a really good policy, but it's quite hidden and most people don't know about it and don't know about the supports that are available. So there's a bit of awareness raising, but we can also flesh out in terms of criteria and in terms of whether or not there's any additional funding or additional support that's been linked with that in relation to COVID. So that's probably a question I would go back with and write to the Minister and then get a response for you, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's cool, but would that affect our money in any way? That's the only thing.
Okay. Well, that's what we'll ask.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Lisa.
And I think one of the reasons for having this all-party group as well is to really place that firm policy commitment and to look at changing attitudes, the culture at Westminster, the attitude that disability sits within DWP, and that's where it sits, because I think that's very constraining for people. It doesn't look at potential, it doesn't look at ability, and in some ways, to me, it seems almost quite discriminatory to place the whole concept of disability within that particular framework. So part of the reason for this particular group is to really widen horizons, to keep raising these issues in Parliament, and to make sure that business is really at the heart of the inclusive entrepreneurship work that we do, and that the Minister for Business and the department becomes more involved as we progress with the work of the group. So I have a list of all of those different questions. Digital education, I think, was another really good one. Who was it that mentioned digital? Was that Noreen?
Hi, Lisa. Yes, it is. And it's actually, I think, a very important point. I'm very concerned about being able to access markets and being digitally ready to access these markets. And I work a lot with clients, helping them to get to that stage. Now, it's one thing to be able to say I can access a market. It's another to be able to access the tools to access the market. And digitally, COVID has pushed us, it has accelerated what has been taking a long time to actually get a lot of ground even within a lot of entrepreneurs. So all of a sudden, everybody is trying to get digital. Everybody's trying to embrace being online and accepting that business is now going to have to be hybrid, where a lot of it is going to just be taking place digitally. I don't believe that a lot of the inclusive entrepreneurs are prepared or have access to the tools, or that the tools are accessible. And here I use the term accessible in its fullest sense, as in websites that have accessibility built in being able to go into e-commerce and actually function properly through accessibility. And this isn't because the business isn't wanting to do it. In many cases, they may not even be ready for it, or it doesn't really exist. I mean, a lot of websites out there, even if you wanted to go shopping from supermarkets, I'm not sure how actually accessible they are. So I think being able to navigate, use them, and be digitally aware, there's a very large scope for digital enterprise education that is really missing, and I think should be firmly put on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. That's so helpful. So I think what we're going to do from today is we will write to the Business Minister asking specifically about access to funding streams for the inclusive entrepreneur, asking about digital education and technology and support to progress those issues, given that COVID has accelerated those issues. We will also be looking at access to work and the criteria around about that, and be saying quite firmly that these should be leading on work to support inclusive entrepreneurs rather than DWP, and that we're looking for the Minister to come and speak to the group as well at some point in the future, as well as responding to the letter. So I think that's been really helpful in terms of the chat, and it's given us some issues to take forward to the next session as well in a few weeks' time. So if I hand back over to Jacqueline, and she can sort of summarise where we're at and what the next steps are, then that's great. And thanks so much to everyone for taking part today. The hour's gone so quickly.
Thank you, Lisa. I think for me, looking at all the questions and comments, what was really pleasing is that the work programme we've put together is right. So that's really pleasing, because everything that somebody's mentioned, we're actually looking at ways of addressing that, and we now have this wonderful group as a mechanism to put all those things forward. So at this point now, what I'd like to do is just see if we have any other business in the session, and we do have one thing that's come forward that I'm actually going to just highlight briefly, and then I'd like to bring Helen in to talk a little bit about how this has been growing in the UK and with the work she's been doing in the Cabinet Office. So just want to make people aware of a report that's been put out, make sure I get the right title. Action for Equality, the Time is Now. And it's basically been produced by the NHS Confederation Health and Care Women Leaders Network. And it's really looking at increasing representation of women on health boards. So what I thought would be really interesting for us is to hear from Helen about the incredible work that she's been doing with the Boardable programme and the impact that that's been having to date. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you, everyone. This has been a most inspiring and fascinating session, so thank you very much. So just briefly, I'm aware of time. The Boardable programme is designed and intended to diversify opportunity, specifically in public appointments, but also more widely for non-executive directors. We trialled the programme 5 years ago, and we've had some extraordinary women and men coming through the programme. It's a practical programme where people on this Boardable programme learn from people who are already in public appointments. So the role models are people already doing senior ministerial public appointments for a range of different government departments. The Cabinet Office partner with us and collaborate with us on this, so it makes it a very valuable resource for diverse individuals who are looking to take on a first public appointment. The Cabinet Office support it, the public appointments team there, and our patron is Sarah Anderson, CBE, who was on the board of the the Government Equalities Department, and she chairs the appointment of public appointees. So she's very knowledgeable about this. So it's a practical programme. We link with these existing public appointees, and we have a range of extraordinary men and women who work with our individuals. And I'm delighted that Jill Pay, former Sergeant at Arms, is part of the programme and one of the key deliverers on that. And of course, we have Jacqueline Winstanley and Noreen Cesario, who are alumna of the programme itself. So please, if you'd like to know more about this Boardable programme, we're very keen to hear from diverse individuals who'd like to be public appointees. So please get in touch, and thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk about Boardable with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. And what we'd like to do now is just tell you the date at the next meeting, which is really exciting again, because that's where we're going to launch our recognition and mentoring programme. So I hope to see all of you and more at that one. So that will be the 17th of November. The times are all differing, and that's literally down to people's diaries. That meeting will be at 3 p.m. This one started at 2 p.m. And I'd like to say thank you so much. Now, I will pass over to Lisa, but I want to tell you how we're going to conclude the session today. Will be with that wonderful piece that James has composed. So I'd like perhaps just pass over to Lisa just to sort of thank everybody, and then we'll play James's piece and then conclude and just say thank you so much, I suppose. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, thanks, Jacqueline. I think it has been absolutely inspiring today, very motivational, lots of enthusiasm as well. I think one of the things that stuck out for me as well is when you know, some of our panel mentioned having role models and mentoring, and that's one of the key issues that we're going to be trying to take forward and supporting the development of through the APPG as well. So I want to thank all of our panel members for being really giving us the insight into what it's like to be an inclusive entrepreneur, the journey and the challenges, and you know, how to progress through those as well, and what's needed for through COVID and beyond. Because that's really informative, and we'll take all of that information forward, and everybody who's attended today as well, because I think we've got so much from the chat, and it's been an amazing session, and I'm very much looking forward to the next one already. But I want to thank everybody, including the Secretariat, of course, and our Jacqueline, and also Pink Shoe, which I always try to call Pink Bag because I'm a bag person.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, I've just noticed that one of our vice chairs has just dropped in, and I'm just wondering whether we ought to give him an opportunity to speak before we play James's.
Of course.
I think Craig has just joined us, and I do appreciate it because I believe all the MPs are rather busy today.
Hi, Craig. Do you have anything you want to add?
Apologies, first of all, I got the wrong time in my diary, which I had it for a 3 o'clock start. So I came in, I thought, crikey, they've got on with this swiftly, but I'll no doubt catch up with you all. But I chair the all-party group on Women in Enterprise, and I'm also involved with the BAME entrepreneur group. So I'm really excited about being involved with this, because I think it's a fantastic group, and it's good to see some familiar faces on there as well from some of my other groups as well. So looking forward to being involved, and I will make sure I'm on time next time.
Next time.
Okay, so please don't all disappear, because what we will do is play out with James's piece, and it is really wonderful, and it's well worth watching to the end. And then at that point, obviously, we will end the session. But thank you so much.
A captive mind, bound and surplus. No work, no purpose. And all my woes met with indifference. Deprived so young has made it tougher. For heaven's sake, don't make me suffer. My heart is bursting from its cage. Give me a reason, let me give something back. Not the institute, let me contribute. Forget the things that I lack. A saving grace in a sea of silence has kept myself from this dependence that left a burden on my life. A pill of hope, an act of kindness. And all at once I tasted freedom. From the cage of life, I am no longer all alone. Give me a reason, let me give something back. Not the institute, let me contribute. Forget the thing that I lack. My independence gave me life. My independence gave me life. My independence gave me life. My independence gave me life.
That's incredible. So with that, we will conclude the session, and we'll end the meeting here. So thank you so much, everybody, and hope to see you all in November. Thank you. Bye.